will send a warning to them. You heard a Border Patrol lady, you heard a soldier. The wrath of President Trump's going to come down. Do not harm our troops or President Trump, or bring hell rain down. And he has the ability to wipe them off the face of the earth. They can claim they're a pretty tough organization, the cartels, and they are, but they're not stronger than the power of President Trump. Cartels are making record amounts of money. They're making record amount of money in alien smuggling and trafficking of women and children and I think the cartels would be foolish to take on the military, but we know they've taken on the Mexican military before. But now we have the United States military on the border. We've got the men and women of the Border Patrol. Do I expect violence to escalate? Absolutely.
El Mencho just assassinated the former Mexican who put his son in prison for life, and Trump's terrifying response is unlike anything we've seen before. Now, the shocking thing is, Morales isn't just any cop. He has a bloody history with the CJNG, and that's why U.S. authorities cannot let this slide. Even worse, El Mencho and the CJNG didn't stop at just Morales. The monsters are out on a killing spree, and your blood will run cold once we get into the full details. But who exactly is this Morales? Why is the U.S. out to avenge him? Could this be the breaking point that finally pushes Trump to launch a military strike against the cartel right inside Mexico? May 1st, 2025. That morning, nobody expected anything unusual. Former Mexican police officer Ivan Morales and his wife had just left their home and were driving in a neighborhood in the municipality of Temixco. Then, out of nowhere, gunmen pulled up and intercepted their black pickup truck, and within seconds, gunfire exploded. Morales and his wife were ambushed, no warning, and they didn't stand a chance. This was a message, a brutal because, as many of you already know, Ivan Morales was the man who helped jail El Mencho's son. Yeah, that El Mencho, the ruthless leader of CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation cartel, and the man behind some of the worst violence Mexico has ever seen. We'll get to that in a moment, but here's where it hits even harder. Ivan Morales wasn't just any cop. He was the survivor of one of the most violent cartel attacks in Mexican history. Back in 2015, during a high-stakes military raid meant to capture El Mencho, CJNG shot down a Mexican military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade. Here is a report on that horrific incident from CGTN America.
Mexico says it is on the offensive against a drug trafficking organization. That organization calls itself the New Generation Cartel of Jalisco. Authorities accuse the group of shooting down a Mexican military helicopter. CCTV's Frank Contreras reports it's how the cartel did it that has raised alarm bells.
Mexico's government claims the New Generation Cartel of Jalisco used rocket-propelled grenades last Friday to bring down this army helicopter, killing 6 soldiers.
We heard a boom, like a bomb. They took down the aircraft. They took it down.
Morales barely made it out alive from the wreckage, with over 70% of his body burned. When medics pulled him from the wreckage, they couldn't believe he was still breathing. Morales didn't just survive that helicopter attack. He became a symbol, a national hero. He got medals, presidential honors. Then, about 9 years later, in September 2024, he testified in court against El Mencho's son, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, aka El Menchito. ABC News reported his extradition to the United States back in 2020.
Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, the 28-year-old known as Menchito, finally extradited from Mexico, and tonight is being held without bond on trafficking and machine gun charges following a brief appearance in D.C. District Court. Menchito, considered the number 2 man in the ruthless New Generation cartel, reporting only to his father, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the feared and fugitive leader whose cartel has muscled its way into Chicago's illegal marketplace.
After a grueling 4-year trial, Morales helped the U.S. secure a life sentence plus 30 years. And that was what sealed his fate. He had disappeared and lived under a false identity after surviving the helicopter crash. He lived in hiding with his family for 10 years, but it still wasn't enough because CJNG waited 10 whole years. Then, on the exact day of the anniversary of that horrific 2015 attack, they found him. And just like that, 2 children lost both their parents in one morning. This was a cold and calculated revenge. Cartel insiders have always said that El Mencho holds grudges. He never forgives, let alone forgets. And to him, Morales wasn't just a threat. He was the man who came dangerously close to arresting him back in 2015 and later helped to lock his son away for life. By doing that, Morales destroyed the cartel's future because El Menchito wasn't just a cartel prince. He was a cold-blooded commander, deeply involved in CJNG's rise. As news of Ivan Morales' assassination broke, the reaction wasn't just grief, it was rage. Inside U.S. intelligence circles, it didn't take long to connect the dots. A federal hero, murdered just months after testifying in the high-profile trial against the son of the most notorious and wanted narco lord on Earth, that couldn't have been random. It was a direct cartel revenge, and President Trump wasn't going to let that slide. A few weeks later, the Trump administration took a step no president had ever taken before. He officially designated the CJNG as a foreign terrorist organization, and that changed everything. Because once CJNG was labeled a terrorist threat, the U.S. could hit them harder than ever before with tools and extreme methods usually reserved for international terrorist organizations like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, and that's exactly what Trump did. First, he slapped sanctions on 5 of CJNG's top leaders, not faceless middlemen, the real decision makers. That move instantly froze any U.S. assets they had and made it illegal for American companies or citizens to do business with them. Then came the message, loud and clear. CJNG's reign of terror across Mexico and its trafficking of fentanyl into the United States has destroyed countless innocent lives, said U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. We are using every single tool to shut them down. The sanctions targeted cartel members like Gonzalo Mendoza Gaitan, a lieutenant suspected of running CJNG training camps where victims vanished without a trace, and Ricardo Ruiz Velasco, who was allegedly behind the live-streamed murder of influencer Valeria Marquez. Then, Trump dropped the hammer on El Mencho himself. He raised the bounty on his head to $15 million. That's one of the highest rewards for any fugitive in U.S. history. Only terrorists and war criminals get those kinds of numbers. But why now? Because the killing of Morales wasn't just about silencing a witness. It showed the world that CJNG felt bold enough to kill a U.S. trial witness. That was a direct challenge to American authority, and Trump wasn't going to let that become a pattern. But here's where it gets even crazier. Despite all this pressure, CJNG isn't backing down. If anything, they are getting even more and more violent and evil. Speaking of evil, that is the only word that describes the horrific discovery Mexican authorities made not long ago. In March 2025, just as the U.S. ramped up its fight against CJNG, Mexican authorities stumbled on something even worse than any cartel violence you have ever seen. It was a ranch in Jalisco State, near the town of Tochitlan. At first glance, it looked like any other cartel safe house, remote, quiet, forgotten. But once they broke ground, what they found changed everything. Piles of burned bones, clothes, shoes, glasses, handbags, different types of children's belongings. Then there's something even more horrifying. 3 hidden crematoriums buried underground, and hidden away in the corner was a Santa Muerte altar covered in half-melted candles. Al Jazeera was right there at the scene, and they covered the outrage and protest that followed the horrific discovery.
But Mexico's shocked, angry. Protests this weekend, shoes in public squares. A reminder of the ownerless ones found in the ranch.
This wasn't just a hideout, it was a death camp. The locals had a name for it, La Escuelita del Terror, the Little School of Terror, because that's what it actually was, a training ground for CJNG's new recruits. Only that they weren't willing volunteers. Many were forcibly dragged in from all over Mexico, and what they were forced to do was beyond nightmare. One survivor said the first stage of training involved fighting other captives barehanded. The only way to lose is to die, and those who refused to fight were executed. The goal was to desensitize the trainees, break their minds, and turn them into vicious killers. Authorities estimate more than 200 people were processed through that single ranch, and many of them never made it out alive. Now here's where it gets even more twisted. This place had been raided once before, back in September 2024. But for some reason, the authorities didn't uncover the full extent of the atrocities going on there. Speaking to News Nation, World of Crime director and author Chris Dalby suggested that there's something more to this than meets the eyes.
This was in a remote part of Mexico, but not too far away from one of the major cities, Guadalajara. It was raided in last October by Mexican authorities who didn't see anything to suggest the scale of murder that was going on there. So you're either talking about staggering incompetence or high-level government corruption that allowed hundreds of people to be taken to this place, killed, and then burned.
And the only reason the full horror was finally uncovered in 2025 was because families of missing loved ones formed a radical activist group. Most of the families in the group had been searching for their loved ones who had mysteriously vanished without a trace, and they stopped at nothing until they got the tip that led them to this death site. Here are some clips of the group members speaking about the horror they discovered.
We found 3 ovens, and in the middle one, when we dug down further, we found bullets, teeth, and fragments of burnt bodies.
The group says survivors told them that the ranch was used not just as an extermination center, but training camp.
Over there was an obstacle course where they made recruits crawl across the floor. There are tires. They had them in forced training, and whoever couldn't do it, they eliminated them.
One of the mothers speaking to reporters strongly believed that her daughter must have been there.
Maybe my daughter was here, and the authorities never support us. They never support us. The only thing they say is, well, what have you got? What have you found?
So what did CJNG do when the story went public? They released a bizarre 4-minute propaganda video with armed sicarios standing in front of the camera, angrily denying everything. They claimed the camp was fake, a setup, blamed the search mothers for creating a horror film to stir up panic. As shocking as that video is, something even more shocking happened as Mexican authorities began their investigation on the site. Mexican prosecutors arrested the mayor of Teuchitlan in western Jalisco state. The mayor, Jose Murguia Santiago, is suspected of colluding with CJNG to run and keep that site hidden for many years. But as you would expect, he has denied all the allegations. Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth videos on geopolitics, like the ones on your screen right now. Click on any of the cards on your screen to watch more of our videos.